Bernie Sanders has teamed up with Ilhan Omar to introduce legislation to address the student loan debt crisis in the United States and the insane cost of higher education. I literally cannot think of any way this proposal could be any better than it already is. It completely eliminates the $1.6 trillion in outstanding student loan debt held by over 45 million Americans. It makes all public 2-year and 4-year colleges tuition free, and this will be paid for by a speculation tax on Wall Street trading. This is the kind of proposal that we desperately need because the cost of higher education and overburdensome for a very long time now. And the loans that students have to take out to finance their education are exploitative. Whether you get your loans from the federal government or a bank, you are being taken advantage of. If your loans are from the government, essentially the government will be making a profit off of you getting an education because the government gets all the money that it uses either from the taxpayers or just printing the money like in MMT, modern monetary theory. So if the government gives somebody a $20,000 loan for college, that money either came from taxing people or just printing the money out of thin air. Either way, it technically doesn't cost the government anything to give that $20,000 loan. It's not like an investor putting up $20,000 of their own money and expecting a return on investment. But if you get that $20,000 loan from the government, you have to pay it back in full, and you also have to pay the interest on that loan, which is thousands of dollars. That is insanely gross when you think about it. Can you imagine the government did this for education at any other level? Imagine instead of high school being completely free and paid for by tax dollars, the government decides to make a profit off of high school education, and they'll pay your cost up front, but then you have to pay everything back and interest on top of that. That is absurd because one of the very basic jobs of our government is to provide a basic level of education to its citizens. And at this late date of 2019, a college or post-high school graduate education should be considered part of that basic level of education provided by the government. If you get your loan from a private bank, it also costs the bank almost nothing to give you that loan since it's not their own money they're putting up to give you that loan. The loan is made up entirely from money that their customers deposit in their banks. So regular people put their money in those banks, then those banks take their customers' money and make these student loan packages. Then those very same customers will come into the bank looking for a student loan, and then the bank gives you the $20,000 loan made up entirely from other customers' money, and then you have to pay that loan back in full with thousands of dollars in interest on top of that. And for what? All they did was gather up money from their customers to give you this loan that isn't even their money, but they're still going to charge you thousands of dollars in interest for them giving you their customers' money. The whole process is absurd and outrageous, but it would be slightly less egregious if these banks were actual investors and the money that they're giving out in student loans was from out of their own pocket. Then it would be slightly more agreeable if they charge you thousands of dollars in interest because they did take a risk with their own money, so they're expecting a return on investment. But that's not the case. They're getting rich off of giving you other people's money. And that is one of the root problems with our higher education system in the United States. What's driving the education system aren't questions like, how do we get education to everyone who needs it? How do we change people's standard of living by providing them with education that can likely change the trajectory of their life? What takes precedence is the people at the top getting rich off of our atrocious education system. And I can't wrap my mind around how people think that's okay. Just because it's college, it's fine to price gouge people out of an education. It's fine to put them in a lifetime worth of debt just to get an education. All college is the next step in education. So I bring up the example of high school again. If this were high school, would we say it's acceptable for the government, state government or federal government, doesn't pay for public high school for everyone? The only way you can get a high school education is if you pay out of pocket or if you get a loan. Then the banks step in and tell everyone, hey, don't worry about it. Your high school education, I got it. I'll give you the money. That isn't even technically my money, but I expect to be paid in full with thousands of dollars in interest on top of that. No one would think that's a good idea. So I don't get how people can agree that would be disastrous, yet somehow draw an arbitrary line for college and say, oh no, it's completely fine to exploit people if it's for a college education though. It's insane that we let this crisis of affordable education get this bad. There are many modern countries around the world that have tuition-free public institutions. And for the ones that don't have that, they have heavily subsidized college, so the costs aren't really a factor for people. This is the richest country in the history of the world. If we don't have free college right now, it's not because we can't afford it. It's because there are very powerful special interests who make a lot of money off the system the way it is right now. In this case, those special interests would be the large banks that finance student loans. So in comes Bernie Sanders, as always, to take on the powerful special interests on behalf of the American people. And it's proposals like this that are the reason why Bernie Sanders is the most popular politician in the country. This is why he has the progressive base of the Democratic Party on lock. This is why Bernie Sanders breaks fundraising records without taking corporate money, only accepting small dollar donations. This is why he had over 1 million people across the country sign up to volunteer for his campaign within a month of his announcement. Something entirely unprecedented in modern US politics. There are these giant festering problems that we have in the United States, whether it's the healthcare crisis or the student loan debt crisis or wealth inequality. And for the most part, every single politician in the House and the Senate and presidential candidates that we've had in modern history either ignore these problems or propose incremental, insufficient change to address these problems. But Bernie Sanders sees these issues and he has the vision to understand that these problems aren't going to be fixed with minor tweaks and changes. We need radical systemic change that gets to the heart of these issues. We don't need to reduce or refinance these student loans like Amy Klobuchar suggests. We don't need to boost Pell Grant funding or to offer tax credits to offset the cost of student loan debt. We need to eliminate all of the student loan debt, no exceptions, full stop. And that is a position that sets Bernie Sanders apart from the rest when it comes to this issue. Even Elizabeth Warren, who's got a lot of praise for her proposal about student loan debt and college tuition, doesn't go as far as Bernie Sanders does. In typical Elizabeth Warren fashion, she stops just short of the actual correct position. Her plan excludes people past a certain income bracket, and that leads to a whole host of problems that I won't get into right now. But one of my main problems I have with that proposal from Elizabeth Warren is she does not see the importance of making universal college education a right. People on the left are making the case that college education should be treated like kindergarten through high school education, meaning everyone in the country should have access to those things without paying anything out of pocket. But Elizabeth Warren clearly does not agree with that argument because she's making exceptions for people who she thinks can afford it. But my problem with that is we go from everyone agreeing that this is considered a basic right that our government should be paying for to saying our government will only pay for it unless we think you can afford it. And that last point is a game changer because then the conversation becomes, okay, where's the line for who can afford it and who can't afford it? And mark my words, the right-wingers and corporate Democrats are going to keep pushing that line further and further. Elizabeth Warren says, if you're in a household making $100,000 a year, you can afford the cost of college. And I don't even agree with her on that. I don't think that's necessarily true for every household making over $100,000 a year. But the corporate Democrats and the Republicans will counter by saying, well, I think if you make $50,000 a year, you can afford the cost of college tuition and student loans. And when we're arguing over where we're going to arbitrarily draw the line for who can and who can't afford college, there will inevitably be people who are above this arbitrary line set by the government but still can't afford to pay for college. And those people will be denied what I think is a fundamental right to higher education in this country. But Bernie Sanders understands this, which is why he's saying, fuck any type of arbitrary lines or exceptions. I'm eliminating all student loan debt, and I'm making public colleges tuition free, regardless of whatever income your family makes. One final point I want to make about this proposal is just the raw politics of this and how this is going to play out on that debate stage Thursday night. This new legislation will definitely be the topic of discussion, but I hope that at some point, someone, whether it's the moderators or Bernie Sanders, someone needs to bring up the bankruptcy bill that Joe Biden wrote. Because there were terrible, terrible things all up and through that bankruptcy bill. But one of the worst parts of that legislation was a provision that made it impossible to get rid of student loan debt even if you declare bankruptcy. Joe Biden made student loan debt the only kind of debt you can't get rid of by declaring bankruptcy. Joe Biden is so in bed with the financial institutions profiting from the predatory student loans that he made sure, even if it's the last thing you do, you're going to pay that goddamn loan back. I can't express in words how unpopular that position is by itself in 2019. But now, hopefully, Joe Biden will have to defend that position on stage with Bernie Sanders, who's running on eliminating that very same student loan debt that Joe Biden says you're going to pay back come hell or high water. I don't think Bernie Sanders should play coy. I don't think he should beat around the bush. I think he needs to take this straight to Joe Biden. I think he needs to crucify Joe Biden over the entire bankruptcy bill, but specifically the provision that made student loan debt impossible to get rid of. That would be the perfect encapsulation of the difference between the two of them. On every issue and at every opportunity, Joe Biden will sell out the American people for the interest of his corporate donors. But Bernie Sanders, on the other hand, like he's proven with this proposal, is always on the side of the working class and is always trying to even the playing field, even if that means taking on powerful special interests like these banks who profit off of financing these outrageous predatory student loans.